Thank you again, everyone, for joining the Institute for College Access and Success's Long View on Student Debt. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to our MC for the day, Rosa Armendariz, TICAS's longest-serving member of the board. Take it away, Rosa.
Thank you, Shannon, and welcome everyone to today's event. As one of TICAS's original board members, I have had the opportunity to watch and nurture this effort for 15 years. I have also had the opportunity to watch an organization evolve from a small project housed in a small office in Berkeley, California, to the well-recognized bi-coastal operation that you all know today. But more significantly, I have had the privilege of getting to know the people behind the work and the passion, the corazón, and the steadfast dedication that drives TICAS. If you've been around this team, you know that their passion for issues of access, equity, and student leadership is contagious, even if you don't speak policy. I am honored to join you today to recognize the impact of TICAS's work and to show our continued commitment to making higher education accessible and affordable for all students. As a first-generation college student myself, who benefited from financial aid, Pell Grants, Cal Grants, and scholarships, and who modeled her career watching many of you do this work, I sit on the TICAS board today after 15 years because the work is not done. I hope we can continue with you to represent the new generation of students with dreams of completing a higher education. With that, I will introduce our first guest speaker, Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa. As chair of the Senate Help Committee, Senator Harkin was a longtime champion of student financial aid. As chair of the Senate Help Committee, Senator Harkin was a longtime champion of student financial aid. In 2010, he initiated a groundbreaking 2-year investigation into for-profit colleges that led to the Harkin Report, which documented widespread predatory behavior within for-profit colleges and continues to serve as a foundation for the accountability work of TICAS and our accountability partners. Senator Harkin.
Hi, I'm retired United States Senator Tom Harkin. When I was chairman of the Senate Help Committee, and with the help of a great staff led by Beth Stein, I led a 2-year investigation of for-profit colleges at a time when few people understood the risk that these schools posed to students and taxpayers. The investigation and the hearings included revelations by undercover GAO agents of systemic lying by for-profit recruiters, and revelations from students and veterans left with enormous debt and worthless degrees. The Harkin Report documented it all: sky-high tuition, predatory recruiting tactics, and terrible student outcomes, while executives and companies were enriched with billions in taxpayer dollars. These findings began to change attitudes about the false kind of access to college these schools offered. These colleges were funded mostly by taxpayers. In some cases, more than 80% of their revenue were federal subsidies. And yet, they left hundreds of thousands of students worse off than if they had never enrolled in college at all. The fight to hold these colleges accountable for how they treat students and how they use federal funds was one of the most intense of my career. At times, it seemed like every lobbyist in town was working for a for-profit college. But TICAS was with me every step of the way, with reliable research, sound policy recommendations, and insightful strategic advice. Together, we worked toward standards limiting high-pressure recruiting tactics, protecting students from fraud, and ensuring that students in career programs were not left with debts they couldn't repay. And while I am retired from the Senate, TICAS has kept right on working, helping Americans understand what many of these colleges were really about. They were about making millions in profits for their executives. So TICAS is now growing a broad-based coalition of organizations working to change this and building bipartisan support for these policies in the House and the Senate. Now, as the Trump administration has deregulated for-profit education and turned the clock back, and with many Americans looking to earn new skills during the recession and COVID-19, continuing this work is more important than ever. So I'm honored to be here to celebrate TICAS's 15th anniversary and to let you all know that their work is more important now than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Harkin. Now it is my honor to introduce Richard Kazis. Richard is the chair of the board of TICAS, and he was previously Senior Vice President of Jobs for the Future. All of us at TICAS greatly value Richard's insight, wisdom, and humility. Richard.
Thank you so much, Rosa. Welcome to all of you who are joining us today as we announce the findings of TICAS's 15th Annual Student Debt Report and celebrate TICAS's 15th year. As Rosa said, my name is Richard Kazis, and I'm the chair of the TICAS Board of Directors, and I'm very proud to serve in this position. I've worked in the nonprofit sector for decades, mostly on issues of education, employment, youth development, and opportunity. I initially joined the TICAS board because I valued and supported its mission to elevate issues of student debt and college affordability, and to do something about it that mattered. Of course, I also joined because who could say no to TICAS's founder, Bob Shireman? In my years on the board, I've become even more impressed and honored to play a role in TICAS's evolution and growth, and in its unrelenting efforts to help many more Americans afford and succeed in higher education. TICAS is a small organization with outsized impact, one of the first to put student debt on the policy map, one of the first to push back against the lack of accountability of for-profit colleges, and a steady champion for increased federal aid for low-income students. TICAS is an organization with huge respect and trust in the field. It provides a lesson in how an organization can be tenacious in pursuing its goals, yet still be a valued resource for those writing legislation and rules and shaping the narrative around what is possible and what is needed in policy. TICAS is strong-minded, yet always evidence-based, non-sensational, and nimble enough to build and advise broad-based coalitions that can seize the moment when policy windows are open. It will be exciting to see how TICAS puts its expertise and capacity to use in the years ahead. I want to thank our incredibly engaged and supportive board, most of whom, like Rosa, are with us today. Thanks are due also to the entire TICAS staff, including President James Kvaal, COO Patricia Balana, Executive VP Debbie Cochrane, for their passion and commitment and for the work they all do, especially in these very challenging times. And special thanks as well to Shannon Serrato and the communications team for putting together today's event. I want to thank TICAS's major funders, Arnold Ventures, the College Futures Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation, and the Joyce, Kresge, and Lumina Foundations. I also want to give a huge thanks to our alumni, a small, fabulous club. A particular shout out to former COO Kelly Solari, who did so much to build TICAS. Hi, Kelly, if you are watching. It's exciting and humbling to see how many TICAS alums have gone on to have huge impact on federal and state policy and on institutional improvement, fighting to make a difference in the lives of many, many students, particularly those from low-income families, students of color, and first-generation college students. You'll hear from a number of these leaders in the upcoming panel discussion. I now want to introduce a message from Representative Barbara Lee, Member of Congress from California's 13th district, representing Berkeley and Oakland, where TICAS was born and where we have our California office. We're thrilled to have Representative Lee's support, and we thank the good folks at Nelson Mullins and former U.S. Education Secretary Dick Riley in particular for reaching out to Representative Lee. And we thank Secretary Riley for his longtime support of TICAS and our work.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and I proudly represent California's beautiful 13th Congressional District, which includes Berkeley and Oakland, California. Thank you to Secretary Riley. And Secretary Riley, I really miss you. And also I want to thank the Institute for College Access and Success for your work to promote affordability, equity, and accountability in higher education, and for inviting me to speak with you all today. I would like to express my gratitude to Secretary Riley, who I had the opportunity to work with, and who has dedicated his career to helping our students and young people succeed, from expanding telecommunications access to advancing improvements to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Yes, COVID-19 and the unexpected shift to remote learning this fall have only worsened the deep inequalities in our education system. Teachers are being forced to pay for PPE to keep their classrooms safe. Students without access to Wi-Fi or technology are being left behind in the shift to remote learning. There is a student debt crisis on top of an unemployment and economic crisis, leaving millions of young people and adults struggling to just get by. Low-income students and families especially are facing hardships and obstacles during this pandemic. I will continue to work to get Senator Mitch McConnell and the Senate to pass the HEROES Act, which includes and addresses student loan relief and funding for schools. As a senior member of the House Appropriations Committee, I have also been working with my colleagues to help boost Pell funding and address affordability. That is why your work to support students and hold institutions accountable is critical, especially during this challenging time. Thank you again, and congratulations on 15 years.
Thank you, Representative Lee. Next is Debbie Cochrane. Debbie is Executive Vice President of TICAS and a recognized expert on financial aid and community colleges nationally and in California. Debbie is going to highlight new findings from today's report, TICAS's 15th annual report on student debt, released today, and talk about what we have learned over the past 15 years of studying student debt. If you have questions, please post them to Twitter at #TICAS@15, and Debbie and other members of the TICAS staff will answer them there.
Thank you, Rosa. Just pull up the PowerPoint. So I am very happy to be able to share with you findings from our 15th report. Student Debt in the Class of 2019 is our annual report that tracks student debt levels for college graduates by state. This year, in honor of our 15th report and anniversary, we also did a 15-year look back on student debt. When family resources and available grants and scholarships don't cover college costs, and when working isn't enough to make up the gap, loans can play a helpful role in enabling students to enroll in college and stay on track to graduate. Our new analysis finds that 62% of college graduates from public and nonprofit colleges left school with debt in 2019, and they had an average of $28,950 to repay. These levels are both down slightly from the class of 2018, consistent with the flattening debt levels we've seen in recent years. However, when we look over that longer time frame, the 15-year period between 2004 and 2019, we see that growth in average debt well outpaced inflation and grew by at least twice the rate of inflation in 18 states. Before digging into the meat of what we found, I want to say a word about what our analysis does not speak to, and that is for-profit colleges. Our analysis relies primarily on information voluntarily reported by colleges to College Guide publishers, and only a very small fraction of for-profit colleges report the data. As a result, we exclude them from this analysis, but want to be clear, it's not because there aren't reasons for concern about student debt amongst these students. In fact, what we see from other debt data sources is that graduates from for-profit colleges are more likely to leave school with debt, have more of it, and are more likely to end up in default. So that said, for the rest of the presentation, please know that when I refer to college graduates for the class of 2019, I'm referring to bachelor's degree graduates of public and nonprofit colleges only. This chart shows average debt levels for college graduates since 2004. Now, the best available data on student debt and many issues related to how students pay for college is the Federal National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study called NPSAS. It's a federal survey designed to be representative of students nationally and within sectors. Within the last 15-year period, NPSAS has been conducted 4 times, most recently in 2016. Now, if you look at the blue line on this slide, these are the NPSAS years. You can see the growth between 2004 and 2012, from $18,400 to $27,850, which amounts to about 5% a year in annualized growth, including during the time of the Great Recession. And then over the subsequent 4-year period, from 2012 to 2016, a period in which the economy was growing, state investment in higher education beginning to recover, growth was negligible, less than 0.5% a year. Now we jump over to the purple line. These are the voluntarily reported data I referenced earlier. In addition to using those data to assess debt levels by state, we also use them to estimate national debt levels in the years we don't have NPSAS data. And what we've seen since 2016 suggests that growth in average debt levels for college graduates has continued to stay relatively flat. As mentioned, our current year's analysis shows very slight declines, but we see this as largely consistent with the years immediately prior. Now, this is encouraging news, which we see as demonstrating the value of investments in higher education. Moving on to how average debts vary across states, here we see the 10 states with the highest and the lowest debt levels for college graduates. This year, New Hampshire has the distinction of being the state with the highest debt levels, and Utah the lowest. We continue to see high debt states primarily located in the Northeast, while low debt states are primarily in the West. This consistency on these lists across years is unsurprising, and it's actually important given the role that states' policies play in these debt levels. More surprising might be the differences between them. Graduates of colleges in New Hampshire or Pennsylvania, as you can see here, are likely to have twice the debt of graduates from Utah or Arizona colleges. You can see the full list of states' ranks in average debt, as well as how they compare on the share of graduates leaving school with debt in the report. Now, we generally discourage year-over-year comparisons of debt averages within states, and that's because changes in which institutions report debt figures from year to year limits the meaningfulness of these annual changes. However, we attempted to account for that in this special 15-year analysis by measuring the consistency in the schools that reported data. This chart shows, for each state, the change in average debt levels over the 15-year period. Now, the darker the bar, the more solid we believe the comparison to be. Importantly, these figures are not adjusted for inflation, but the dotted line illustrates what inflation was over the same period, 36%. In nearly all states, average debt grew much faster than inflation, and it grew twice as fast as inflation in 18 states. Now, in the report, we highlight 3 of the states where we have the most robust data reporting: New Jersey and Pennsylvania, where average debt doubled, and Arizona, which is one of the few states where debt grew in line with inflation. An important factor in understanding debt burden is actually not just about the amount, it's also whether graduates can repay it. Now, while college graduates are typically much better positioned to repay their debt because of the value the degree holds in the labor market, some graduates do struggle. This year's report uses a new federal data set, looking at students who earned a bachelor's degree in 2016, to show that 1/4 of college graduates experience repayment difficulties within their first year after college. Amongst Black college graduates, it's 40%. Now, repayment difficulty here is defined as missing payments or securing temporary loan relief like deferments and forbearances. Another important factor is the type of debt that students are graduating with. Experts agree that for students who need to borrow, it should be federal loans first, because private non-federal loans that come from banks and lenders and even some states and institutions can be costlier, and they lack the consumer protections embedded in federal student loans. Now, overall, for the class of 2019, we estimate that 16% of their debt is private loan debt, but it varies across states. In 10 states, as shown here, at least 30% of graduates' debt comes from private non-federal sources. I do want to flag that these state level figures are not directly reported in the report, but they are available on College Insight, our data website. Now, of course, since the class of 2019 graduated, we've entered into a global pandemic with huge implications for students, families, colleges, and states. We know from a Hope Center survey that students are facing greater levels of basic needs and security than they were previously. We know from an Arizona State University survey that students, and particularly low-income students, are delaying graduation. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities has projected that as much as $555 billion, and there will be that much in lost revenue over the next few state fiscal years, which would have huge implications for higher education funding and college costs. It's too early to say exactly what COVID will mean for college affordability and student debt, but it's important to recognize that the pandemic hit before state funding and student debt levels had recovered from the Great Recession. And it puts in jeopardy the progress that we've seen in recent years as debt levels have flattened. So to highlight just a few of our federal policy recommendations, we recommend that federal policymakers invest in students and public colleges by doubling the federal Pell Grant and creating a new federal-state partnership to help states weather the recession and ultimately curb state disinvestment. We recommend that Congress extend and expand emergency relief to student loan borrowers in light of COVID. For most student loan borrowers, payments have been paused and collections have been stopped. But these provisions should be expanded so that all borrowers, including those with private loans, have immediate relief through the entirety of the pandemic. We also recommend that the federal government, given this time of uncertainty, improve transparency by collecting better data on student debt and online enrollments, data that could help to enhance oversight during and after the crisis. In addition to these and other federal policy recommendations, the report makes several recommendations for what states and colleges can do themselves. I want to thank our entire research team for the tremendous work and effort to conduct the analysis I've reported on here and write the report. Please read it and explore the data yourself on the TICAS or College Insight websites.
Thank you, Debbie. Next is Pauline Abernathy. Pauline has been a core part of TICAS's work as an early funder, board member, and longtime executive vice president of TICAS. In many ways, her vision and standard of excellence continues to define TICAS's work. She is now the Chief Strategy Officer at the Benefits Data Trust in Philadelphia. Pauline.
Thank you, Rosa. I am honored to be asked to speak today and to have the privilege of introducing Senator Elizabeth Warren. It is no secret that she is an outspoken champion for students and student loan borrowers and an ally of TICAS in advocating for increased college affordability, accountability, and equity. But her connection to TICAS actually dates back to TICAS's birth when she was a law professor. She had just published The Two-Income Trap, debunking the theory that middle-class families were struggling because they were spending too much money on frivolous consumer goods. And Bob Shireman and James Kvaal had just published TICAS's first report, Money for Nothing, which brought national attention to how some lenders were collecting over $1 billion a year by recycling loans at 9.5% interest. Bob and James wrote the report without funding during the summer before James started law school. Almost immediately, it prompted bipartisan legislation to address this massive waste of taxpayer dollars. I thought, if they could do this without any funding, imagine what could be done with funding. I was at the Pew Charitable Trust at the time, and Pew went on to be the lead funder of TICAS to ensure students and taxpayer interests had a greater voice in policy debates, which until then had been dominated by institutional voices. Just as Professor Warren's work documented that middle-class families were going bankrupt due to healthcare crises and other systemic factors rather than profligate spending, TICAS went on to document that student debt was not just a personal problem for a small number of students who had made bad decisions, but a national problem affecting a majority of college students and families with huge implications for the economy and racial equity. Student debt is now so firmly established as a serious national policy issue on both sides of the aisle that it is hard to remember that it was not in 2005. Senator Warren, TICAS, the other speakers today, and so many others are responsible for that. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not also mention the role that Senator Warren's proposal to create the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has played in student loan policy and in TICAS's evolution. While I was at TICAS, we saw the Federal Reserve Board's failure to regulate private education loans, and we threw ourselves into the fight for the CFPB's creation and its authority over private student loans. In the process, TICAS built strong relationships with consumer, civil rights, and veterans organizations that continue to this day and have helped to curb predatory student lending, provide student debt relief to millions of Americans, and increase college accountability, to name just a few of the accomplishments that would not have been possible without Senator Warren's leadership on behalf of students and the leadership of TICAS, its funders, and allies. With that, I give you Senator Warren.
Hello, TICAS. I am so sorry that we couldn't do this in person, but I'm really glad to have this chance to visit with you for just a minute. Congratulations on 15 years of work on student debt. I want to say thank you for all of the work you do to help make college affordable, accessible, and equitable for students. I also want to give a shout out to TICAS President James Kvaal, who, by the way, is one of my former students. So go, James. We are living in unprecedented times. America is facing historic economic and public health crises, and now in the middle of an economy that has been badly hit by the pandemic, student debt is like an anchor pulling our struggling economy down, preventing a swift recovery, and restricting opportunity and prosperity for millions of Americans. Even before this pandemic, student loan borrowers were struggling with huge amounts of debt, and student debt disproportionately burdens Black and brown students, especially women of color. 12 years after graduating, the typical Black borrower owes more on their student loan than they originally borrowed. This crisis was created by federal and state governments deciding they'd rather cut taxes for billionaires and businesses, that they would rather divest from public higher education, that they would look the other way as predatory for-profit colleges exploited and defrauded students. It comes from the fact that they'd rather offload higher education costs onto the backs of students and their families. Today, in TICAS's 15th annual report, we can see that student loan debt is at an all-time high. The pandemic and recession will make it even harder for students to repay their loans, and this problem will only get worse if we don't take action. Look, the way I see it, we all have a responsibility to act. We need to make sure that students can attend a public college or university for free. We need to invest in HBCUs and MSIs to make sure that our Black and brown students aren't forced to go into debt for a college education. And we need to broadly cancel student loan debt and put those monthly payments back into our economy. And in Congress, I'm working hard to do exactly that. Last year, Representative Jim Clyburn and I introduced legislation to cancel up to $50,000 in student loan debt for 42 million borrowers. And just last month, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and I introduced a resolution outlining a bold plan for the next president to cancel up to $50,000 in student loan debt without going to Congress. None of us are in this fight alone, and that's why I wanted the chance to talk to you today. I'm going to keep fighting to make sure that our students and their families have a fighting chance to get ahead without getting crushed by student loan debt. So, let me say again, thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for the fight for college access and success, particularly for our Black and brown students. Keep up your great work. We're counting on you. People across the country are counting on you. And you can count on me. I'm with you all the way on this.
Thank you, Pauline, and thank you, Senator Warren. Now we have a panel of current and former TICAS staff and board members to put all of this in context. Stepping back to look at what's changed over the last 15 years and what might come next. And I will introduce our 6 panelists briefly. We have Lauren Asher. Lauren was president of TICAS for 8 years and is now an independent consultant to nonprofits and philanthropies on higher education and healthcare issues. Londe Ajose. Londe is a former board member of TICAS and is now a senior policy advisor to Governor Newsom of California on higher education issues. Ajita Talwalkar Menon. Ajita is a former policy advisor at TICAS and is now the president of Calbright College. Bob Shireman. Bob is the founder and a former president of TICAS. Zakiya Smith Ellis. Zakiya is the vice chair of the board of TICAS and the chief policy advisor to Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey. And finally, James Kvaal. James is the current president of TICAS. I have 2 questions for each panelist, and then we hope to have time to take a couple of questions from the audience. Please take your questions, or please ask your questions on Twitter using the hashtag TICAS@15. So panelists, the first question, looking back over the last 15 years, what has been the most important development with respect to student debt? And Lauren, you can kick us off.
Thanks so much, Rosa, for all you've done for TICAS and to everyone here today. One of the most important changes in the last 15 years, which came directly out of TICAS's work, is that virtually all federal loan borrowers now have access to an income-based payment plan. That means not just a more manageable payment based on income and family size than they would have had access to before we started our work, but also it makes sure that they can move on after 20 or 25 years of payments to all the other things they need to devote their resources to. TICAS built the evidence base and the model for what became IBR and built support for the concept. Students, schools, lenders, civil rights groups, and even legislators on both sides of the aisle all saw the value in making loan payments more manageable because rising costs, stagnant incomes, and inadequate aid made it harder and harder to get through college without borrowing, and that is still the case. TICAS led efforts to spread the word about IBR, to make it easier for borrowers to access income-based plans, and to improve their design. And the options have gotten better for borrowers in many ways with each iteration. More than 8 million borrowers are now in one of several IDR plans. But there are still too many distressed borrowers who could benefit and too many defaults given the option of IDR. Better servicing and simplification are the keys to fulfilling IDR's promise going forward, as long as a simplified program continues to protect the most vulnerable borrowers. And no matter how optimally designed or widely used, IDR isn't and can't and wasn't designed to solve the larger problems of rising college costs and student debt that are documented in today's report. It's a critical safeguard for borrowers, but not a solution in itself to what drives the need to borrow for college, including public underfunding of this public good and the structural inequities that make college least affordable for low-income Black and Latinx students.
Why don't I go next? So first of all, I just want to start by congratulating TICAS on 15 incredible years of contributions to not only the nation, but the state of California. Governor Newsom often says that California is America's coming attraction, and I think that's particularly prescient when it comes to the role that TICAS has played in California. When I think about the role that student debt has played in terms of TICAS in California, it's been important for TICAS to really highlight the importance of how state financial aid can help to blunt the effects of student debt, of students taking on a massive amount of debt, if you have a robust financial aid program. TICAS has been instrumental in helping the state of California understand the intricacies of its own program, the importance of financial aid for those students who may not be eligible for Cal Grants because they fall outside of age requirements, the importance of making sure that the state's paid rate is not faltering at 80% or 90%, but that we're paying out as many grants as we can to students who are eligible. The importance of non-tuition costs. TICAS has done some groundbreaking research to show how non-tuition costs place an enormous burden on students and play an enormous role in students not being able to afford college today. What that looks like is in large part the result of differences that we see in regions across the state, differences in regions and differences in institution type. It can be much more expensive in California for a community college student to attend college despite tuition costs than it can be for a student to attend potentially one of our four-year institutions. The fact that we know all of those things, the fact that we are as familiar and understanding of the intricacies of our program is in large part due to TICAS's contributions to the state of California.
Congratulations to TICAS. It's wonderful to see everyone. A development that comes to mind for me of the past 15 years is one that I think we probably didn't pay enough attention to when it first happened, which is Grad Plus. So these were the creation of a program with no loan limits whatsoever. And when you have that kind of that was created around the same time as income-based repayment, and the two of those together create some moral hazards where colleges can feel like, boy, it doesn't really matter how high tuition is in these graduate programs, and that indeed has emerged as a problem. It is also somewhat difficult to address because you have traditional colleges that have become addicted to these Grad Plus loans. We're also seeing growth in parent loans, which don't have income-based repayment, but are similarly unlimited. So I've wanted to, as an important development, it demonstrates we still have work to do in addressing the issues of college costs, college debt going forward.
A great segue to just sort of illustrating how we've come from a shared view of the problem, first understanding the impact of rising student debt, but then to a real deeper understanding of the ways in which different communities have been disproportionately impacted by debt. And I think these actions and policies have really been about creating then better incentives for institutions and servicers and to correct for the kind of regulatory conditions that support those better outcomes for students. It has evolved our understanding in ways that help us also confront how the solutions we've built, like Bob talked about, work in real life for real people and what additional work is needed. Both on the loan servicing and the debt collection side in particular. I have to say that being both a producer and a consumer of TICAS's work over the past 15 years, the depth and the analytical work that has been an ongoing and critical part of identifying not just the trends, but really the nuances that should be shaping the solutions that we design. ones that actually raise the bar on quality in the programs and services that are delivered at the state and federal level, and really ensures that equity is present in the design of those solutions. These are insights that have been a critical guide for us and continue to be a critical guide for us on the right kinds of policies and program interventions responsive to ensure that the systems we've actually built are working for everyone. And really the build over the past 15 years means that we're now able to focus much more on the impact of the policies and the programs that we have and how we improve that through stronger policies and stronger implementation.
And it's been amazing to watch the change in the level of importance of higher education, and particularly the issues that TICAS has raised around student debt and college affordability. I would highlight in particular, just over the past 15 years, we've gone from this kind of being a niche issue that only a few people, a few wonks, like James and Bob, would write papers on, to really the premier education policy issue that's being discussed on the national level right now. And I think that would not have occurred in that same way without the work of TICAS as an organization in really highlighting not only the issues, but solutions. And so the other thing that I would say in thinking about the future is that the kinds of the solutions that Senator Warren talked about, that others have talked about in terms of repayment, are, again, front and center in terms of the structure of what people are talking about for federal policy moving forward. They are the solutions in terms of state policy and affordability or financial aid that Lande mentioned are the front and center for what states are looking at. But I also think that I anticipate that this will be one of the first major acts of any new administration, or if there are changes at the federal level, this will be, it already is. Of the pandemic, we're kind of looking at student debt as a serious issue that that the current administration is trying to address. So in a bipartisan way, I think TICAS has been able to break through, and it's your research, the research of the organization over these last 15 years has really put us as a nation in a place where we're much more prepared to bring forward the kind of solutions that are really necessary for students and borrowers today. So kudos to you all.
Thanks. I'm Ben, cleanup here. I want to thank everyone, the previous speakers, for being a part of the day. It's really an incredible collection of higher ed heavy hitters who have been and are part of the TICAS project. As far as the most important trend of the past 15 years, for me, I would highlight and state disinvestment. And we've seen about once a decade a recession hits and states make deep cuts into their public colleges and universities, but they're never able to put that money fully back when the economy recovers. And the result is that funding is ratcheted down over time. And that is one reason why tuitions are going up, student debt is going up. During the Great Recession, for example, between 2008 and 2012, we saw state funding fall by $2,000 per student, and borrowing went up by $1,100 per student, not per borrower, per student per year. So that's more than $5,000 over a typical 5-year undergraduate program. And it is good news that the numbers we're releasing today show a slowdown in debt, even a reversal, small decline in the class of 2019. But I think we should all take some optimism from the fact that we can slow and even reverse student debt totals. At the same time, we need to keep in mind there are a lot of people out there struggling. Even in the class of 2019, we know a lot of people will struggle to repay those loans. And we should be very worried about backsliding as a response to the pandemic and the recession.
Thank you, panelists. My second question, where do we go from here? What do you predict the future will bring for student debt? And we'll start off with Lauren.
Thanks again. Well, there's a lot we don't know about the next 15 years, but I know for sure that We have not yet solved how to hold schools accountable for how well they serve students and the value they deliver to both students and taxpayers. And that remains a crucial challenge for TICAS and its allies and for policymakers, and will only become more urgent going forward. COVID-19 has made the need for accountability and stronger consumer protections for students and borrowers only more necessary. Our economic crisis, as a result, is increasing the risk that unscrupulous, overpriced, poor quality programs will rip off students and taxpayers. At the same time, high quality, affordable skills training has never been more needed. And college degrees are proving to be, as we've known before, the best insurance against underemployment in a very difficult and dynamic economy. TICAS led efforts to expose and address just how bad it got in the last recession, when for-profit colleges operated without meaningful oversight. And this current accelerated shift to online delivery of both degree and non-degree programs, as well as more complex and frankly opaque arrangements between public and private entities, are only making it harder for students and others to tell who's really providing their education and what they're getting for their money. So unless there are major improvements to college affordability policies and enforcement and much more clarity about what high quality and effective online education and training looks like, we're going to see a return to some of the particularly egregious student debt, distress, and ripoffs that we've seen before and haven't been mitigated enough. So we're going to hopefully we'll have a commitment at the federal and state level for an accountability system that, I'm trying to shorten my remarks because I have so much to say about this, that treats education as more than just a private good, that recognizes the different purpose and value of different kinds of education programs. You know, an HVAC certificate, which is probably a great thing right now if it's good quality, because we really need clean indoor air, is very different than an English major, which may or may not be about becoming an English teacher. That focuses on the risks that colleges can pose to students, not the risks that students pose to colleges. We know that identical colleges, even in the same county, serving the same students with the same programs, can have very different outcomes. So what colleges do matters. That prevents harm as well as response to it, and rewards colleges that are doing a good job. And we're going to need to see states really step up, as we've seen how fragile the federal accountability structure is with changes in administration and regulation. They are stepping up, and I think they're going to need to step up more until and unless we have a federal commitment to sustained protection. And with that, I'll hand off to Lande, who has a unique California perspective.
Yeah, I think I would echo some of the remarks that Lauren made. One is I think this issue of opaqueness in terms of the kinds of institutions that certainly seem to be showing up in California, and whether or not they are for-profit or nonprofit or public institutions incorporating as other types of institutions, is something that we really need to be on the lookout for to ensure that students are well served as those organizations incorporate in different organizational forms. I think the other piece is that, you know, I think states often do the best that they can, since we can't print money in a recession in terms of funding higher education. But I expect that TICAS will be out there kind of leading the fight to ensure that we continue to invest as much as we can in higher education, particularly for students and low-income students. So I would expect that that would be a role that TICAS would play as we continue to make our way through the recession and through the effects of the pandemic. And then the final piece I would say is, as we understand this pandemic and how it's affected real lives, we're really shifting and changing our notions of what constitutes basic needs. And I would expect that TICAS will probably play a lead role in really thinking about how do we think about what constitutes financial aid for what are real basic needs? Because I think the pandemic has certainly demonstrated to all of us that actually access to a computer, that the digital divide is not simply something that is extra, but that is essential for resilience of our state and our economy. And that if we are not making sure that students' costs are accounted for in terms of the cost to have access to digital, you know, to broadband or to a device, then we're actually not taking care of students and allowing them to have the education that they deserve.
So I agree that the issue of value is front and center, should be front and center, and that's especially true on the tuition side of things, be asking is this program worth the price? Is this program, is it appropriate for the government to be providing aid at that level of tuition, which is something, it is telling to realize that we have, there are rules about how a student's own budget, what it can include, but nothing about what a college can charge, and that needs to be taken into greater consideration in terms of policy.
I definitely concur with both the table stakes nature of having a strong accountability framework and the right incentive structure, and a recognition that this dynamic between cost and value, which has seemed grossly misaligned, especially in recent years, needs to be corrected. The one other thing I'll add to it is, I think while there's no substitute for a strong regulatory framework, I think there is also such a great deficit and need when we consider the opportunities and options actually available and accessible to people, especially subpopulations of our communities that have been affected by this economic dislocation. And one thing that I'm hopeful, if we do right in the next few years, will carry us forward for the next 15 years, is our response in this moment to those creating the space for those lasting solutions to be designed, to be developed, to be measured, to be tested, because I think we have to speak to the gap in the current educational offerings in higher education, in workforce training, in both of those spaces, in ways that are both accountable, but that leave room for new solution design. And I primarily bring that up because I think without addressing those gaps in the places that people are falling through, we'll continue to leave space open for that gap to be filled by large-scale for-profit providers producing low-quality, high-cost scams for individuals. And so I think it's both critically important that we have our eyes focused in two directions going forward, and with fidelity to the communities that need us to come up with better solutions.
And I wholeheartedly agree with Ajita and would say, given that communities of color have been disproportionately impacted by COVID, I've taken to, those in the African-American community will know the phrase, when white America gets a cold, Black America gets the flu. And now when I go to groups, I say, well, unfortunately, white America has the flu, something worse than the flu, and Black America's dead. And so I think that is also true in how we think about the situations that Ajita is referencing in terms of the opportunities for individuals right now. Those who are out of work are again, those who are in low-wage jobs, who don't have post-secondary education. We have I don't know what the shape of this recession is, but it's one where people at the top who are basically college educated have been inconvenienced, but generally okay and able to work from home. And those who are not are really, really struggling because there's just not a substitute and a way to get by. And so what we do and how we respond in this moment, and the solutions that we, some of which will be about post-secondary education and some of which are more about relieving people of the stresses, unfortunately, of a bad post-secondary education that have left them in a bad place in terms of repayment. And again, both of those issues are issues where TICAS has led. And so I think that going back to my comments from earlier, not only because we're talking about this before COVID in this moment, but because of COVID, moving forward, the kinds of debt relief and affordability and accountability for quality education will continue and to be high priorities.
I get to make the last prediction, and mine is bold, perhaps a bit more of a hope, but it seems to me that what can't go up must come down, and that we as a country have maxed out on this strategy of financing education through debt, and we're going to need to face up to the costs of investing in the higher ed system that we want. And the value of a bachelor's degree is very, very clear, but for decades we've taken a fiscally irresponsible approach to financing it not by government borrowing, but by individual borrowing. But the same way, either way, it's borrowing from the future rather than investing in the future. And for many students, loans are better than nothing. But we do have to face up with the fact that student loans are a bad fit for many students who fail to graduate or face labor market discrimination or other racist systemic barriers, who enroll in higher ed programs that are not intended to produce the types of economic benefits that would justify a loan, or who were just ripped off by their college or get a low quality education. So even those who do graduate and find a job, we see debt is now at a level where it's starting to impact career choices and home ownership, other types of financial security. So it has had a long run as an easy choice of asking students to borrow more and more, but I think that, that we're not going to continue to have larger and larger student loans, and we're going to need to find a new way to finance educational attainment that we all want, or I hope that we will.
Thank you to all of our panelists. And I want to remind the audience that the conversation will continue on Twitter with the hashtag TICAS@15, and we hope you'll engage with us that way. And I'd now also like to offer James an opportunity for some closing thoughts.
Thanks, Risa. I really want to thank the incredible staff, board, and alumni of TICAS. They've built this incredibly impactful and talented organization. I think that our system of higher ed may have more untapped potential than any other American institution to promote upward mobility and equal opportunity, but student debt can sap this potential by forcing graduates to start their careers underwater, or sometimes worse off than they had never gone to college at all. So there is a lot of work to do, but I do believe over the last 15 years that TICAS has demonstrated that good policy analysis, good research can impact public policy and make progress for students. And I think with the help of our supporters, our partners, our funders, that's something we can continue to do. So thank you.
So thank you once again to our panelists, to everybody involved in the program, to the TICAS staff, board, alumni. And as everybody has noted already, I'm convinced that college finance is a problem we have to solve to close racial and economic disparities in our country. Student debt is not inevitable. Wise policies can halt and even reverse the rising tide of student debt. And we had great examples from our panelists today of areas where we could focus on. Due to COVID and the recession, that work is more important than ever. And we invite you today to join in the conversation on Twitter and to continue in the advocacy with us. And as someone who works in the community college system, I do really value this partnership and the work that we're all doing together. This concludes our program for today. Thank you once again for joining us. And once again, we hope to continue the conversation with you through Twitter. Thank you and have a good day, everyone. Congratulations, TICAS.